let's get this show on the road. Thank you so much for coming, and please ask questions as we go forward. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we will talk about food insecurity with the executive team of the Alameda County Community Food Bank with guests Suzan Bateson, Executive Director, and Allison Pratt, Chief of Partnership and Strategy. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take, Suzan, we will take 3 snap polls during the show. We'll announce results, and questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So Suzan, thank you so much for being here. Allison, I don't have you yet on my camera. There you are. It's great to have you both here to talk about this really important issue. And you know, I was looking at some statistics in Alameda, and Alameda is kind of representative of the United States. 20% of Alameda County residents live in hunger. And you are trying to fill a gap, and 20% is a huge portion of our population. Suzan, could you talk about the actual problem that you confront? And let's do that with reference to not only the issues that we have in the Bay Area, but also on the national front in the United States.
Yes, I think we're in the midst of a crisis, and Alameda County Community Food Bank and food banks across the nation are changed forever. We are extremely busy right now meeting community need. Our work is incredibly dynamic and changing by the minute to make sure that we're serving everybody in Alameda County and across the nation, in a nation where no one should ever go hungry. We estimate our need has doubled in Alameda County, which is stunning. We have gone, this month, in fact, October will be our biggest month in food distribution ever. We're likely to distribute 5 million pounds of food this month. And that is just record-breaking, stunning.
When you say doubled, are we talking a year-over-year doubling?
Yes, yeah. And our community, you know, the one thing I want to emphasize about our work is that we have done an incredible amount of research to find out who is food insecure in Alameda County and who was marginally food insecure before this pandemic took hold. And Allison, I'd really love it if you could speak to our research and how that has helped us in this incredible time.
Yeah, certainly I can do that. Thank you, Suzan. So about a year prior to this COVID crisis, we worked with the Urban Institute out of Washington, D.C. to do a deep dive to measure hunger and food insecurity in Alameda County. So as Suzan described, there are about 200,000 people in our county of 1.6 million people who are considered food insecure. This means those 200,000 people are actively reducing the amount of food that they eat, they're skipping meals, they're deploying these really dire coping mechanisms. There are another 130,000 people in Alameda County who are considered marginally food secure. And that's a difficult term to wrap your head around, but what it means is that people might not be skipping meals yet, but they are certainly experiencing that stress and anxiety. They're worried about where their next meal is coming from.
Allison, when were these studies executed?
They were executed in 2019. So this was like we actually just went public with this data in December of 2019.
So this was during this was during one of the more prosperous times,
right,
in this region's history, and you have 200,000 people in these prosperous times who were already food insecure and were cutting back on their necessary caloric intake, right, in order to make ends meet. And then there were 130 people who were so on the cusp that they would be sometimes dipping in and then dipping out of food insecurity, right?
Exactly.
So that's 330,000 people. That's 20% of a 1.6 million population area.
Right. And we actually believe that's a really conservative estimate. One of the reasons that we engaged the Urban Institute to do this work is because There are lots of national surveys of hunger, right? But the algorithms that are developed to support those surveys, we didn't feel like those were a really good fit for Alameda County because of the extraordinary high cost of living that people face here. So you can be making upwards of 300% of federal poverty level income and still not be making enough to pay your bills and put food on the table here in Alameda County. It's a real challenge for people.
So Kenneth Kutchman just asked a question: is there a food shortage, or is it a cost issue? I'd add in there is a logistic issue that food is developed here and can't be supplied there. Suzan, how do you see this? And are we talking about a situation that is so baked in? Because if 20% are food insecure during the prosperous times, I mean, that's the explanation, because we have a pandemic, we have economic distress, and all of a sudden that curve, which is high, all of a sudden goes through the roof, right?
Right. And I'm going to say something quite shocking. I am telling you that we will know and we will respond to the effects of this pandemic for the entire decade. So the entire decade that we are in, Alameda County Community Food Bank will try to serve people who have lost their jobs, lost hours, lost, their credit, lost their homes for a decade. And when I start to hear, economics experts talk about, we'll be out of this in 2022. I think that's a bunch of hooey, because nonprofits like ACCFB are going to be helping people well into the decade. And we know that because of the last Great Recession, which makes this look like a walk, that looks like a walk in the park compared to where we are right now. And to answer your question about what are the challenges, yes, all three of those things you mentioned: logistics, huge challenge; supply, huge challenge.
Supply meaning that is there enough food? Is there actually enough food if we can get it to the right people, or is it the issue of food is too costly? In terms of Kenneth's question.
Yes, and food is, there's probably enough food made in the world to feed every single person on this planet. How it gets to every single person on this planet is another story. And if it gets to every single person on this planet, in America, and particularly in California, I think we're incredibly fortunate. Much food is grown here. Your food banks in California avail themselves to fresh produce. So half of the food that Alameda County Community Food Bank distributes are fresh fruits and vegetables, many of them grown in California. So we're fortunate in that. However, all food banks, all grocery companies, think Walmart, think our local Safeways and Whole Foods, we're all shopping for the same food at the same time. And right now we're noticing that people are starting to kind of stock up. And we don't know what the holidays are going to look like. For instance, one of the challenges that we're looking at is gatherings are going to be smaller this year. That means that more turkeys are going to be sold. That means that more smaller gatherings are not going to stretch our food supply like they have when we were not in a pandemic. So we're very concerned about food supply moving forward, and how ACCFB and food banks across the country will get their products that they need to nourish our families.
So there was another part of this question, which is, are you supplying other necessities, toilet paper, those kinds of things through the food bank, or is it just nutritional elements?
At Alameda County Community Food Bank, we decided a long time ago that we would really concentrate on food because that's what people needed the most. And so we rely on other organizations to provide other supplies. Now, that being said, if an opportunistic load of an item like toilet paper or mixed household items would come to us, we wouldn't turn that down, and our agencies would be very, very happy to get that. And I should probably pause and state for a minute how ACCFB operates. We are a networked organization with about 300 providers that are members of Alameda County Community Food Bank, and they provide food to our neighbors in every single pocket of Alameda County. So we are 300 partners strong and very reliant on our network to be that front line for us.
So important to note. I read a very important statistic, and I want to test this with you, Allison and Suzan. And we have a poll going on right now, which ties into that. So there was a study from the California Budget and Policy Center that working parents of a family of 4 require an income of $92,267 in order to be above the poverty line in Alameda County. It was actually focused on the city of Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the average income of an Oakland resident is $32,000, right? Which means that in an average household income of four people, you have an average income of $96,000, which means that we are basically working at a deficit of about $16,000 just on an average basis, right? So we actually have a math problem in Oakland. In Oakland, the average person is falling short of what is required to live above the poverty line. If that's the case, if we have an averaging issue, is it true that the food bank system is actually becoming a middle-class reliance system in order to allow people who are at the lower end of middle class, and certainly people who are below this sort of middle class kind of piece, that average piece, to just survive on a day-to-day basis? Allison?
Right. I mean, let's be clear, right? It is incredibly difficult to make ends meet here in the Bay Area. It takes a tremendous amount of income to pay rent and to meet the cost of living here. One of the things that we do at the food bank, in addition to distributing food, is we work to maximize federal nutrition programs, right? We want to make sure that everyone who is eligible for SNAP or CalFresh here in California is connected to that benefit. Same with things like school feeding programs. One of the challenges we do face, though, because of that incredibly high cost of living, is that there are many people who earn too much to qualify for any of those federal nutrition programs, and still, again, are struggling to pay their bills and put food on the table. So that is a unique niche population that we are serving at Alameda County Community Food Bank. And, it has implications for our operations in terms of how and where we serve people through our food distributions. But it also has implications for the types of policy work that we do. Again, we are very focused on strengthening the nutrition safety net, but we're also thinking about how do we create a more inclusive economy? What are those policies that we can advance that really support working families? One of our big policy wins this year was expanding the California Earned Income Tax Credit to include immigrant tax filers. And that's huge. And that alone is going to bring resources equivalent to 2 million meals into Alameda County for working families. We're also, concerned with things like subsidized childcare, paid family leave. All of these are things that can help people get their economic foothold so that they are able to make ends meet here in the Bay Area.
Is this becoming more than a safety net and becoming a sort of an everyday net in order to allow us to have a society where people can actually work and earn enough money to feed themselves, Suzan?
Absolutely. And that's our goal, is we'd love to see people, a steady paycheck should be a guarantee against hunger, and it is not. And we need to change that. Another area that ACCFB is focused on is racial justice. We know we've watched this during COVID. Who's been hit and impacted the most by COVID? It's Black, Indigenous, people of color in our communities, and we need to pay attention, and we need to start changing our society to be more inclusive and more equitable. We need to step forward, and food banks need to step up. We have the platform, and this is our right, and this is our message.
Unless people think that this is only an issue in the San Francisco Bay Area or even in urban centers, we travel around and collaborate with PBS stations all over the place. We were in Duluth, which is a mid-sized city in Minnesota. We were in Bemidji, which is in the middle of a rural area. We were talking about these issues, and the statistics scaled to the particular regions are very, very similar, whether we're in Texas or in Washington, D.C. We have these issues over and over and over again. And we just took a poll, and 92% of people felt that if families earning an average income were food insecure, that government does have a responsibility to implement policy, tax, or legal fixes. So let's talk about how we as Americans ought to respond, because it seems to me that while nonprofits do have a role in this, you cannot create nonprofit food banks large enough to sustainably address these issues. And if we're going to have an America built on the middle class, we really do have to start thinking in very serious terms how we ensure that hardworking people, as you said, Allison, can earn enough to make a living. Are you working on any advocacy elements in order to try and make yourself less necessary, let's put it that way, to an Alameda County resident?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And I think one of the things that makes Alameda County Community Food Bank unique is our belief that the most critical component to the solution to hunger is leveraging those public sector resources, right? And holding government accountable. So, I think we've got some of the components in place. It's just up to us to maximize them. A good example of that is the free and reduced price breakfast and lunch in our schools. And this is a great COVID example too, right? When shelter in place orders were issued and schools were closed in March, school districts were trying desperately to figure out how can we still feed kids, right? But they were operating these federal programs under all of the non-pandemic friendly rules, right? That students couldn't take the meals home, that they had to eat them in congregate settings. None of these rules were going to work during a pandemic. So the USDA issued waivers, and essentially what we have now is the ability to feed children in schools almost universally, right? Why aren't we doing that all the time? Why aren't we leveraging our schools for universal feeding all the time? So some of it is just maximizing what we've got. Other policies, again, as I described, how do we build a more inclusive economy? How do we build equity in our economy going forward? As Suzan mentioned, no one could have predicted the COVID crisis, but the fact that communities of color are in harm's way is sadly entirely predictable, right? So how do we really think about how we recover as a county, as a state, and as a nation in a way that doesn't just return us to normal, right? A lot of people want to just go back to normal. Well, normal wasn't working for everyone. We need to figure out how we can do things differently to create that more inclusive economy. Things like expanding the earned income tax credit to I-10 filers. I keep coming back to it because it's such a brilliant example. But these are the issues that ACCFB is working on. It's tax policy, right? That the tax code is one of our strongest tools for redistributing resources, and we need to maximize that. But it's also housing, it's healthcare. We're very concerned about what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act. So there's all of these fronts that we need to be covering to make sure that families are able to get that economic foothold and be self-sufficient.
It's kind of the it's kind of the question of how do we have a healthy America where when we don't necessarily have communities that can access food or access health services or access education, right? We as Americans benefit from a civil society that is strong for everyone. And we just asked a question. One of our attendees pointed out that the structure of the question was a little bit ambiguous because we asked how important food banks are to you as as a resident in America. And 56% of people said it was extremely helpful, and 37% it was somewhat helpful, 7 unhelpful. And the person pointed out that we weren't referencing whether you personally used a food bank. And we actually did that on purpose. And the reason is that you can say that it's very helpful without being a user. You can say that it's very helpful without even being a volunteer. When you say something is very helpful, then what you're basically saying to yourself is that it's helpful, so I want to support what you're doing. And we have here a total of over 90% who believe that these facilities are helpful. And I think that's really important. If we can reach a consensus on what's helpful, then we can all take action and across the political spectrum, right? Do you think that this is a political issue?
Well, gosh, that's a great question during election season, right?
Is it a Republican, Democratic, conservative, liberal, progressive, libertarian? Susan, what do you think? I mean, do you think that it makes a difference to the solution what political philosophy I personally espouse to what you do?
So I think hunger should be and is a nonpartisan issue. I think we all should agree that no one in a country that has so much should have anyone going hungry. And that's a platform that we will always stand on.
So if I was a libertarian and I felt that I had a particular set of views on how America should function, and if my neighbor were hungry and their children were hungry, you think the response should be the same as if I were a conservative or a liberal or a communist or whatever it is? Is that,
I
is
do.
that what you're saying?
I 100% do. And look, we are in a crisis, and we should not be in this crisis. Allison and I work very hard to hold government accountable, but at the same time, we're holding ourselves accountable to ensure that everybody who needs a meal can have a meal. And we believe that that is the way society should be. That there is enough for all, and that we really need to think about how we as Americans are voting, if it's an issue of voting, but really all people who represent constituents in the United States should care about whether they are nourished enough to hold a job, to be successful, to realize their dreams, to be well. That is so important. And we are very concerned that people will come out of this pandemic, even if they haven't been affected by COVID, not being as well because they haven't had access to nutritious food.
Now, we've been talking about values. Let's talk about logistics and operations. You have 300 partners, and those partners need to have financial fuel in order to play their role. Right. So how does that work? How does the money actually work in terms of suppliers of food? So these are very often growers. The logistics piece, your staffing. How does that work? Susan, why don't you take a first cut, and Allison, then if you could talk about the partnerships in terms of how the financial elements function, that would be great. Susan?
So first off, I want to say, Mark, that it's people like you and me who give to food banks. Individuals are the most generous donors to Alameda County Community Food Bank. And we find that remarkable and heartwarming, frankly. And generally, The next level would be foundations and corporations, and the next level would be government. Right now, we're working very closely with Alameda County government and with advocates across the nation to ensure that government is held accountable and that the government not only supplies food through TFAP, but also provides resources to food banks and other providers that are helping low-income people across the nation. When I think of Alameda County Community Food Bank right now, I think of us as our community's grocery store. And frankly, I think of food banks across the nation in this moment in time as the community's grocery store, which means that our logistics and the logistics of our partners have had to seriously be amped up. And we are investing more money in those 300 partners to make sure that they have the equipment, the refrigeration, and other things and staffing that they need in order to serve our community. We're also going to be refreshing our own infrastructure, our own facility to make sure that we can optimize. We have a 118,000 square foot facility. So we have a large facility. We're only in one facility, which is so fortunate, but it was maxed out. And so we're going to be,
think of a museum, a world-class museum, and it just has food and food operations, right? I mean, that's basically what you're talking about.
Exactly. And so those are a few things that we're working on to improve our infrastructure, to improve our partners' infrastructure. And then one thing I want to add real quickly is we've also changed distributions. So we've worked with partners and we've opened contactless drive-through distributions. Allison spoke of the school partnerships, and one of the great things that we were able to do early on is as schools were handing out packaged breakfasts and lunches, they also were wonderful in handing out bags of food that Alameda County Community Food Bank provided. So the families had more than the breakfast and lunch for the students. They had food for their family as well.
So we have a last question from Amanda Baharona Hawkins. I'm sorry if I got your name wrong. But the question was about the use of tech. You were talking, Susan, about touchless deliveries. And tech, of course, drives everything. And you have a logistical issue. You have to think about expiration dates. You have to get that food out there. You have to get it processed. Allison, how tech intensive is this operation? And are you, as you meet this tremendously expanded need, are you more dependent on tech? And do you have needs in that area as well?
Yeah, one of the amazing things that we've experienced over the last 9 months are our partners, including tech partners, reaching out, to offer their assistance, and that's led to some really lovely pilots that we've been able to deploy. Things like smart sheets to track data at those touchless drive-throughs. Really quickly, I'll describe one of my favorites, and that was we actually collaborated with Amazon and our public health department to provide home deliveries of food to people who were diagnosed with COVID and who were ordered to shelter in place. And that's one of my favorite collaborations because we heard from our public health department that their contact tracers were making these phone calls to people, telling people that their COVID test was positive and telling them that their quarantine started immediately. And the first question that people would ask was, how am I going to get food? How am I going to feed my family? So we were able to collaborate early on with Amazon to make sure that those food deliveries were going out. So, now as we're entering into the 9th month here, we're thinking about sustainability and how we continue, what are those pieces of this new infrastructure that we've built that we're going to continue, and what are those things that we're going to kind of, blend into our operations as they previously existed.
One of the things that I've always loved about our work is that I get to discover anew every single day with every single conversation how Americans are problem solvers, and generosity intersects with that, right? We just completed a poll in which we asked, do you help or donate to food banks? And 71% of the respondents said yes.
Nice.
I discovered that, if it isn't food banks, it's homeless shelters. If it isn't homeless shelters, it's the arts or education or the environment. People are constantly trying to make the world a better place according to their own lights. And it could be a corporation, it could be an individual, it could be a foundation. We're all in this together. And if we're going to solve our problems and make America the country that it ought to be, right, this more perfect union, we have to all get engaged, don't we, Susan?
Yes, we do. And we all do better when we all do better, as Paul Wellstone once said.
And being knowledgeable is part of that. I'd like to thank you both for participating in this show on hunger, and emphasize again, as you have, that this is an American issue. It's an issue for increasingly for the middle class, and we really have to start looking at these issues and figuring out together how we can solve them, because in those solutions are stronger communities. So thank you very much. That's the Nonprofit Report. Attendees, thank you so much for your questions. Please attend next week, November 3rd. We're going to have a call-in show. It'll be a half-hour call-in show where we'll just open the mic and have people comment on the election and their votes. We want to try and keep it positive and focus on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. And on the 12th, we're going to have another call-in show about the use of media to draw public attention and support to nonprofit organizations. Thank you both, Suzan Bateson and Allison Pratt of the Alameda County Community Food Bank. Thank you for attending. Stay safe, mask up. Have a great day.
Thank you.